Hey guys, tonight we slip into the strange, shimmering, faintly suffocating world of Japanese heian court fashion. Imagine for a moment the weight of 12 silk robes draped across your shoulders, each one stitched with care, dyed with colors that have meanings you barely understand, but you'd better get right or risk offending the wrong noble. The air is still heavy with incense smoke, and the thought of simply sitting down feels like preparing for a royal negotiation. This is fashion not designed for convenience, not for rushing around town, but for being admired while doing very little at all. Honestly, you probably won't survive this wardrobe unless you count suffocating under 40 pounds of silk as surviving. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, post your location and the local time in the comments. It's always fascinating to see where and when people are listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself in Heian-kyo, the capital of Japan, in the 10th century, modern Kyoto's ancestor. It's not bustling the way Edo or Tokyo would one day be. Instead, this courtly city hums with poetry, readings, lantern light, and the soft swish of fabric dragging along polished wooden floors. Daily life for the elite isn't about sword fights or battles. This is an age of aesthetic perfection. Clothes are your armor, your social signal, your entire resume. The average noblewoman spends hours, sometimes half the day, just arranging her outfit so that each silk layer peeks out at just the right angle. Historians still argue whether the number of layers was strictly regulated or whether fashionistas just went wild competing until someone finally toppled over. You stand in the women's quarters, servants bustling around you. The robes, called junihaito, literally 12 layers, are anything but light. Each inner robe clings warmed by your skin, while the outermost ones bloom outward in heavy folds. It's summer. Too bad. No one's stripping down. Comfort is a distant afterthought. And the silk, it's thick, not the whispery scarf-like stuff we imagine today, but a rich weave meant to show expense and artistry. If you sneeze in this outfit, you'll probably pull a muscle. One mainstream fact that grounds you here: these ensembles could weigh up to 20 kilograms. That's like strapping a toddler to your shoulders and then trying to gracefully glide across a tatami mat. Nobles wore these inside palaces designed with sliding screens and verandas where the breeze might cool you, but only slightly. And that's why, despite all the grandeur, no one moved quickly. When you picture Heian court life, imagine a world where time itself slows down because fashion won't let you rush. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some women intentionally allow the inner sleeves and hems to peek out, arranging the colors like layered petals of a flower. Think of it as the medieval Japanese version of showing off your sneaker game by making sure just the right socks peek out. Court ladies turned into walking bouquets, cherry blossom pinks, pine greens, snowy whites, each combination a coded message. If your palette clashed well, you might as well exile yourself socially. You shuffle to a low seat, carefully lowering yourself, an operation that requires planning. Sitting too quickly risks bunching the silk in awkward lumps or worse, revealing a foot. Yes, just one bare foot could send the gossip mills spinning. Fashion here wasn't only about looking rich, it was about concealing, teasing, hinting. The very effort of wearing it reminded everyone that you belonged to a world where life was so leisurely that spending 3 hours dressing was not only acceptable, it was expected. Imagine your servants tugging at sleeves, adjusting folds, smoothing hems. The process is communal. You don't dress yourself, you're dressed like a living doll. And that's the deeper point. These robes weren't designed with your comfort in mind. They were meant for display, to turn you into a tableau, part of the visual poetry of the court. When the emperor's consort enters a hall, she's not a person so much as a moving painting, silks trailing like brushstrokes. Historians still argue whether every noblewoman truly wore the full 12 layers, or whether that number was symbolic, a poetic exaggeration. Some diaries hint that 6 or 8 might be more practical, especially in the summer months when Kyoto's humidity made every robe cling like damp moss. Still, the phrase Junihito stuck, and it's the image that survives endless layers, endless patience, endless hours of preparation. By now, you're sweating just imagining it. The air smells of burning aloes wood, a scent clinging to fabric as much as to the palace halls themselves. Outside, cicadas buzz, reminding you that seasons matter here. Because in the Heian court, fashion isn't static, it changes with the turning of the year. Wearing the wrong color in the wrong month is like showing up to a funeral in neon green. But that's a story for later. For now, sink into this vision. Candlelight flickering across lacquered floors, the soft swish of silk dragging in your own body, stiff and heavy beneath a rainbow of fabric. You're a living masterpiece, yes, but one that risks toppling over if someone startles you. And sitting down, that's an Olympic sport. The first beams of sunlight slip across the palace walls, painting the wooden corridors in pale gold. Morning at the Heian court is less about waking up quickly and more about drifting gracefully into consciousness. You're not expected to leap out of bed and conquer the day. No, your job is to emerge like a poem written in silk. That means the dressing ritual begins early, long before you're ready to sit through endless banquets or exchange poems behind screens. Servants hover, moving like shadows with bundles of fabric stacked in their arms. They bow, they wait, they whisper. You sit still, half dreaming while they unfold the first robe. This is the cassode, the base layer, plain but soft like the whisper of a secret. Over that goes another, then another. By the third robe, you've already lost track of where your body begins and the silk ends. The layering is hypnotic, almost ceremonial, a dance where you are both the stage and the centerpiece. Mainstream fact, this dressing ritual could take hours, often beginning at dawn, to ensure that by the time the court convened, every noble woman appeared flawless. The clothes were never simply put on. Each robe had to align perfectly at the collar, each sleeve spread just enough to reveal a harmonious sliver of color. The act of dressing was a performance in itself, watched and admired by attendants who silently judged the final result. And here's the quirky tidbit. Nobles often kept diaries describing their daily outfits with as much care as you might note down your favorite meals. A lady might write, "Today I wore plum over willow green beneath a robe of misty lavender." Imagine in 2025, journaling, "I wore my favorite hoodie over gym shorts beneath a blanket burrito." Not quite the same ring, but it proves how fashion defined identity. You shift slightly, already feeling the weight grow. The sleeves drag like obedient pets across the floor, gathering specks of dust that no one dares mention. It's not about cleanliness, it's about grandeur. You're a walking tapestry, and tapestries don't worry about crumbs. Historians still argue whether these long dressing sessions were meant purely for vanity or whether they carried ritual significance. Was it about beauty alone, or was each robe a silent prayer, a talisman against bad fortune? After all, colors were tied to season's elements, even subtle spiritual associations. Wearing green in spring wasn't just pretty, it echoed renewal and life. Wearing it in the wrong month might make you look ignorant, or worse, unlucky. As the layers build, the room warms. The screens slide open, letting in a cool morning breeze. You glance outside to the palace gardens, where carp swim lazily in a pond framed by irises. Nature is carefully curated here, just like fashion. Every rock, every flower bed has been placed to echo a poem, a reference, a delicate symbol, and your robes must match that harmony. Finally, the outer layers appear brighter, heavier, their brocaded patterns gleaming. A servant adjusts the trailing hem, so it fans out like a sunrise around your seated form. You're not just dressed, you're sculpted, turned into a living shrine of silk. This is the daily burden and joy of Heian nobility mornings, sacrificed to the art of being seen. The robe hems rustle as you shift your body, no longer entirely your own. You've become a piece of architecture, something admired for symmetry, grace, restraint. To sneeze, to laugh too hard, even to scratch your nose feels like sacrilege. And the strangest part, you're not alone. Somewhere in another wing of the palace, dozens of women are going through the same ritual. Each one is hoping her colors will outshine the rest, that her entrance will cause just enough stir to be remembered. It's fashion as silent competition, a pageant judged by glances and gossip without a single word spoken aloud. By the time you're finally ready to leave your chambers, the sun has fully risen. The garden shimmers in the morning light, your sleeves heavy with perfume and expectation. You're not stepping out into the day, you're gliding into an endless performance. And all of this, you realize, is only the beginning. You haven't even walked to the audience chamber yet, where your robes will catch on corners, drag across polished wood, and remind you with every step just how impractical beauty can be. The corridors stretch ahead of you, polished to a mirror, shine every beam of wood humming with the weight of centuries. You shuffle forward each step, deliberate each rustle of silk announcing your presence before you even arrive. But the true theatre of fashion here isn't just in the movement, it's in the colours, those carefully chosen layers that whisper secrets about who you are. Mainstream fact first, in the Heian court, colour combinations weren't just decorative, they were codes. A robe layered in shades of pale green and pink might signal springtime, while deep reds and gold hinted at autumn's fire. Wearing the wrong set wasn't a simple faux pas, it was a social misstep that could brand you as careless or unrefined. Rank season even moods were broadcast in the folds of fabric. You didn't need to speak, your sleeves had already spoken for you. Servants bustle around you earlier in the morning, whispering the choices aloud, laying swatches of silk in neat rows. Cherry blossom over willow, one suggests, or perhaps plum over mist. It sounds poetic, and it is. Each set of hues has a name like a haiku, a fragment of nature translated into thread. Dressing becomes less about warmth and more about storytelling, one robe at a time. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some nobles were said to experiment wildly, pushing color boundaries just for attention. Imagine someone at court showing up with what looked like a watermelon palette, bright green layered under pink. Was it daring? Tacky historians still argue whether fashion rebels were admired or quietly mocked. It's the Heian version of wearing Crocs with a tuxedo. No one knows if you're making a joke or a statement. The corridors are dim, lit only by lanterns. Every step sends your sleeve edges fluttering like banners. Behind screens, attendants and rival ladies peek their eyes, flicking down to catch glimpses of your palette. There's no direct confrontation, no runway showdown, just a silent current of comparison. You walk, and every gaze weighs you down heavier than the silk. You pause in a hall where sunlight filters through paper screens. The colors shift under the light, brightening or dulling depending on the angle. Suddenly you realize why so much care goes into this. A robe combination that looks ordinary indoors might ignite into brilliance when the sun hits it just right. That's the gamble, that's the art. Historians still argue whether the strictest codes came from official manuals or whether they evolved through the diaries of fashion-obsessed nobles. Some texts list recommended seasonal palettes, but the juiciest details come from gossip records, those little notes in court diaries saying Lady so-and-so wore plum over pale yellow today, most improper for the second month. You can practically hear the side-eye traveling across time. You glide onward, trailing silk across the polished wood. Somewhere the faint sound of gagaku music drifts from another hall, flutes and drums winding like smoke through the palace air. The atmosphere is dreamy, ritualistic, but underneath is tension. Because clothes aren't just beauty, they're survival. A noble's position at court isn't guaranteed. Your husband's rank, your father's influence, your poetry skills, your gossip network, all of it counts. But what people remember first is the color of your robes when you bowed. Fashion here is political armor, woven not with steel, but with dye. And the dyes themselves, oh, they're stubborn, difficult, expensive. To achieve a perfect shade of crimson, you need safflower petals, harvested, carefully processed in secrecy. Indigo requires fermented leaves that stink for weeks before the color emerges. And if you're unlucky, a rainstorm might dull your perfect palette into something sad and muddy. Here's another offbeat tidbit. Nobles sometimes sniffed their sleeves like perfume testers. because it wasn't just the look, it was the scent. A robe dyed in certain plants carried an aroma mixing with incense to create a signature aura. Imagine being remembered not only for your witty poems, but because she always smelled faintly of plum blossoms. Your path finally leads toward the audience chamber. Ahead, guards' bow screens slide open and your colors ripple forward before you do. You're not nervous, you can't be. Every shade you wear is already rehearsed, practiced, perfected. But deep inside you wonder, is your palette enough to be remembered? Or will it dissolve into the endless rainbow of courtly silk, forgotten the moment you glide away? That's the pressure of Heian fashion beauty that must dazzle every single day or vanish into silence. The hallways echo with your slow approach, and by the time you reach the larger audience chamber, your arms ache from holding the weight of fabric steady. You glance down, and there they are, the sleeves oversized long enough to sweep the floor, and then some. They don't just hang, they trail, they billow, they create their own kind of choreography with every movement you make. Mainstream fact in the Heian court sleeves grew so exaggerated that they often measured longer than the wearer's own height. Think about that for a second. If you're 5 feet tall, your sleeves might drag out to 6 or 7 feet, rippling like banners behind you. This wasn't an accident, it was theater. The more sleeve you had, the more fabric you controlled, the more attention followed your movements. And attention was everything. At a banquet, you didn't stand up and give speeches. You let your sleeves do the talking. A subtle flick, a careful drape over your lap, the precise way the folds overlapped. This was communication without words. If you've ever watched someone nervously twirl a hoodie string or fidget with their phone case, imagine instead twirling 30 pounds of embroidered silk. Here's the quirky tidbit: ladies of the court sometimes use their sleeves as makeshift letter carriers. A folded poem could be tucked neatly inside and slipped across to a lover or friend, with nobody the wiser. It was like having a built-in secret pocket, except instead of denim, you were hiding messages in shimmering brocade. Historians still argue whether this sleeve mail was widespread practice or just a romantic flourish recorded in poetry, but the idea alone makes every swish of fabric seem suddenly suspicious. The chamber opens wide as you enter a sea of tatami mats glowing under lamplight. Everyone is already watching. Men sit behind low screens, ladies arrayed like orchids in bloom, each one a cascade of colors, and sleeves spread like wings. The silence is thick, broken only by the faint pluck of a koto somewhere in the background. You move slowly, deliberately, because there's no way to move quickly. As you lower yourself onto the mat, the sleeves pool around you, forming a halo of fabric. The weight presses against your thighs, your legs half numb beneath the pile. Sitting is its own ordeal. You bend, carefully folding layers into neat arcs, adjusting with small, imperceptible tugs. If you get it wrong, if one sleeve tangles awkwardly or rides too high, you risk not just discomfort, but embarrassment. Because here, elegance isn't just preferred, it's demanded. You look around, every noblewoman is doing the same dance. One adjusts her sleeve so it drapes like a waterfall. Another arranges hers to frame her face in a careful oval. It's not just about the sleeves themselves, it's about what they frame, what they hide, what they reveal. Behind those curtains of silk, your hands might tremble, your posture might falter, but the fabric shields it all. Historians still argue about the practicalities. Were these sleeves truly as unwieldy as the literature suggests, or have the descriptions grown exaggerated over centuries of retelling? Some modern scholars suggest that the most extravagant designs might have been reserved for ceremonial occasions, while day-to-day robes were less absurd. But the diaries of Heian women, those treasured, often anonymous records, insist on the difficulty of everyday movement, which makes sense. If you've ever tried to eat spaghetti in an oversized sweater, you know that sleeves can be your worst enemy. Multiply that problem by about 1,000. The koto music shifts a higher note ringing out, and you glance toward the source. A musician sits cross-legged, her sleeves trailing across the floor, her fingers barely visible beneath them. Somehow, she makes music without catching a single string in silk. You can't help but admire the skill. It's like juggling with your arms tied down. And here's another strange thought. The very size of the sleeves created an odd intimacy. When you leaned towards someone, when you whispered or laughed, your sleeves might brush against theirs, silk sliding on silk. That fleeting contact carried meaning charged with suggestion. Two sleeves touching in the right moment could stir more gossip than an entire love poem. Now seated in your carefully arranged puddle of fabric, you can feel the weight of eyes upon you. The robes may be heavy, but the scrutiny is heavier still. You can't scratch your nose, you can't adjust your hair. You sit, you breathe, you exist as an image. And yet there's comfort in that too. The sleeves shield you, protect you, turn you into something more than human. You're no longer just yourself, you're a vision of Heian beauty, a fleeting masterpiece in silk and dye. You exhale softly, hiding a small smile. The sleeves shift, pooling a little wider, and you let them. After all, what else can you do? The banquet begins slowly, as if the palace itself has to stretch awake before daring to speak. Trays of lacquerware slide across the tatami, placed just within reach, though with your sleeves sprawled across the floor. Reaching is no small feat. The air hums with fragrance, grilled fish, brushed with soy steaming rice, and something sharp, tangy, maybe pickled plums. But the dominant scent isn't food at all, it's perfume. Clouds of incense cling to robes drifting up from braziers, mixing until the entire chamber smells like a forest set on fire by flowers. Mainstream fact. In the Heian period, noblewomen were expected to cultivate personal scents as carefully as they chose their robes. Fragrant woods like aloes wood or sandalwood were burned robes, smoked until they absorbed the perfume, and powders of ground clove or cinnamon were dusted lightly on skin. This wasn't optional, it was identity. To walk through a corridor and leave behind a trail of perfume was as essential as leaving behind a good poem. Here's the quirky tidbit. Heian nobles actually held incense contests gatherings where courtiers tried to identify the blend of scents burning from hidden braziers. Imagine a game night where instead of playing charades, everyone leans in to sniff smoke and argue whether it's plum blossom spring dawn or evening mist in autumn pines. Historians still argue whether these contests were purely playful or whether they carried subtle stakes, your ability to detect scent, proving your refinement, your worthiness to mingle among the truly elegant. You dab your face with powder pale as porcelain now. In Heian fashion, white was beauty. A powdered face, smoothed flaws, softened features turned every noble into a living painting. But it wasn't just the face. Teeth, for example, were blackened with a lacquer called ohaguro. Strange to modern eyes, yes, but to Heian sensibilities, blackened teeth framed by a white face looked refined, sophisticated. In the candlelight, the contrast was striking, eerie, mesmerizing. You lean slightly, lifting a fan to conceal your mouth as you chew. Every movement is rehearsed. To eat without disturbing your paint, without smudging the powder on your cheeks, is as much a skill as composing a poem. One bite too large and you're clumsy, one drip of sauce on silk and you're doomed. The banquet drags on course after course, more about endurance than appetite. You listen as courtiers murmur lines of poetry, trading verses like currency. Behind fans, eyes flicker, glances dart. Who looks elegant? Who looks tired? Who seems careless? Whose sleeves are slipping out of their perfect arrangement? The food is almost irrelevant, it's the stagecraft that matters. Historians still argue whether most nobles genuinely enjoyed these endless feasts or whether they endured them for the sake of appearances. Diaries often complain of boredom, of exhaustion, of aching backs, yet no one dared to leave early. To vanish before the final course might be read as insult or worse as weakness. You feel sweat prick at your temples beneath the powder. The robes are suffocating layers, trapping heat, perfume growing cloying. But you don't shift, don't fan yourself too much, because restraint itself is part of the performance. Elegance isn't comfort, it's control. Across the hall, you notice a rival lady tilt her head back slightly, letting her long hair cascade like a river across her sleeve. The room hums with approval. That simple gesture, a calculated spill of hair, timed with a poem about flowing streams, captures more attention than the food ever could. You sigh inwardly, realizing your turn will come. Every noblewoman must find her moment, in the banquet spotlight, some small performance that secures her place in memory. A servant leans forward, pouring sake into your cup. The scent rises sharp and sweet, but you lift it with slow grace. No gulps, no sloppy sips, just a measured taste, lips barely touching porcelain. The fan shields your mouth, though everyone knows you're drinking. It's the theatre of secrecy, a ritual of concealing what's obvious. Here's another odd detail. Nobles sometimes perfumed their sleeves so heavily that lifting one to take a sip released a wave of scent into the air. It wasn't just you drinking, it was your aura, your carefully curated fragrance, drifting out like a personal announcement. Imagine sipping coffee while your hoodie releases a burst of vanilla cloud around you. Subtle, not really. Effective, absolutely. The banquet continues. Musicians pluck at strings, drums rumble softly, dancers in layered robes move with the grace of drifting clouds. Their sleeves too become instruments, fluttering with every spin, catching candlelight. You can't decide whether the performance is for entertainment or just another reminder of how impossible perfection looks when achieved. Hours slip away, yet the plates keep coming, the sake cups refilling. You feel the numb ache of sitting too long, the stiffness of a body bound in silk. And still you smile faintly, dab powder where needed, hold your posture. Because this is life at the Heian court, not indulgence, not relaxation, but survival through elegance. By the time the banquet is over, the hall smells like a mixture of sake incense and the faint musk of overheated silk. Your body aches from holding the same posture for hours, but the night doesn't end there. As the moon rises, another ritual calls hair. Mainstream fact noblewomen of the Heian court prized extraordinarily long hair, known as subarakashi. The ideal wasn't just waist length or hip length. No, the most admired hair brushed the floor and beyond, trailing several feet behind its owner like an extra robe. Growing and maintaining such hair was a lifelong commitment, one that required endless patience and servants with strong arms. The process begins with brushing. A maid kneels behind you, pulling a wooden comb slowly through strands that feel like a waterfall, each stroke deliberate, careful. Imagine brushing hair so long it tangles in its own weight, catching on sleeves, sweeping up stray crumbs from tatami mats if you're not cautious. The brushing takes as long as dressing, a ritual of smoothing, straightening, perfuming. And yes, hair was perfumed, too often smoked gently over incense so that every movement left a lingering trail. Here's the quirky tidbit: some women reportedly measured their hair length obsessively, bragging in diaries about inches gained over the years. One lady even noted that her hair had finally surpassed her height, as though she had achieved a noble milestone. Historians still argue whether everyone truly kept hair to such extremes, or whether the most exaggerated accounts belonged to those competing for literary glory. After all, diaries were part fashion, magazine part social weapon. Who's to say some noblewoman didn't stretch the truth about her tresses just to impress? You tilt your head slightly as the comb works through stubborn knots. It's soothing, rhythmic, but also a little absurd. Because while the image of a lady gliding through corridors with a shining black river trailing behind her sounds ethereal, the reality is less glamorous. Try sleeping with 20 feet of hair wrapped around you. Try avoiding spills of soup or ink. Try going to the bathroom without tangling yourself. Long hair may be beauty, but it's also hazard. The candlelight glints on strands as the maid finishes tying the hair loosely at the crown before letting the rest spill free. You shift slightly, and the entire mass follows a dark tide against your back. It tickles your wrists, brushes against your sleeves, slides over the mat with a whisper. Combined with the layers of your robe, you've become a creature, half human, half fabric, all performance. And here's another curious note: long hair wasn't just for beauty. It carried symbolic weight. In Heian poetry, hair often represented the essence of a person, their spirit, their vitality. To dream of tangled hair might signal turmoil. To see a lover's hair in moonlight could inspire verses that outlasted empires. Your hair was as much your signature as your handwriting. The hall grows quieter. Some courtiers have already retired, screens closing softly behind them, but you remain, hair freshly perfumed, robes still heavy. You feel almost unreal, a silhouette of white-faced dark hair, shimmering silk like a painting that somehow learned to breathe. Historians still argue whether this extreme devotion to hair was uniquely Heian or whether it extended more broadly in Japanese culture. Later eras favored more practical styles, elaborate buns, pinned arrangements, ornate combs, but the Heian court lingered in its fantasy-stretching beauty to the limits of inconvenience, and that's what makes it so haunting, a society willing to endure discomfort for the sake of aesthetic perfection. You lift your sleeve slightly, adjusting the fall of hair, so it cascades forward, a veil of black against white powder. In that moment, the room tilts, candlelight wavers, and you see yourself as others see you, a vision, drifting in a world where even hair becomes theatre. And just as you're sinking into that thought, a small, familiar irritation returns. Your scalp itches from the incense smoke. You can't scratch, not without risking your entire image, so you endure, smile faintly, and let the river of hair conceal the truth. Elegance, after all, is half about what you hide. You're still seated, surrounded by the slow rustle of silk and the faint crackle of braziers, when you reach for the next indispensable tool of court life, the fan. At first glance, it seems simple, just lacquered wood and painted paper. But here in the Heian Palace, a fan is never just a fan. It's a mask, a weapon, a love letter, and sometimes a shield. Mainstream fact-folding fans, known as ogi, were already in use during the Heian period, carried by nobles of both genders. But women especially transformed them into subtle instruments of performance. A fan could conceal a smile, hide the shape of a mouth as you spoke, or cover a sudden flush of cheeks in candlelight. A gesture so slight a fan raised an inch higher, tilted just so, could shift the mood of an entire exchange. You lift yours, now the surface painted with pale blossoms, stems curling across the folds. It feels cool against your face, a small relief from the heat of robes and perfume. You angle it so that only your eyes show above the lacquered edge. From behind the fan you can watch without being watched, study without being caught. A whole social ballet unfolds here, carried by tiny flicks of paper. Here's the quirky tidbit: some fans doubled as notepads. Nobles occasionally scribbled poems or messages onto them, then casually left them in plain sight for the right person to discover. Imagine slipping someone your number by leaving your Starbucks cup on the table, except instead of a cup, it's a priceless hand-painted fan. Historians still argue whether these fan poems were intentional strategies for romance, or whether the idea has been exaggerated by later storytellers enchanted with the romance of court life. The hall hums softly as courtiers murmur to one another. You angle your fan in greeting, a tiny wave. Someone across the room tilts theirs in return. Words are unnecessary, this is all silent theatre. Fans flutter, fold open again, sending coded signals across the room like semaphore. You wonder what half of them mean. Maybe it's just habit, maybe every movement is deliberate. You can never be sure, which is half the thrill. As the night stretches on, you feel the weight of the fan in your hand, its balance delicate, almost alive. You tap it lightly against your sleeve, an idle rhythm to pass the time. Others do the same, soft thuds, echoing like heartbeats beneath the murmur of poetry. The fan becomes your veil. You sip sake behind it, speak through it, laugh into it. Without it, you'd feel exposed, barefaced in a world where concealment is power. The irony isn't lost on you: the less people see, the more they imagine. And in the Heian court, imagination often matters more than reality. Historians still argue whether fans carried universal codes of meaning, like open halfway, equaling flirtation, or close, sharply signaling disapproval, or whether such systems were personal, understood only by certain circles. What's clear is that fans gave women a rare form of control. Behind one, you could withhold, reveal, deceive. It was theatre in miniature, folded and unfolded with a flick of the wrist. The air cools as the night deepens. You lower your fan slightly, letting the painted blossoms catch candlelight. It's beautiful, yes, but it's also armor. Without it, you'd be just another woman drowning in silk and powder. With it, you're untouchable, enigmatic, a half-seen vision. And there's another practical detail too. Fans stirred the air. In rooms heavy with incense smoke and too many layers of fabric, even the faintest breeze felt like salvation. You flutter yours slowly, just enough to keep from sweating. Everyone pretends it's for elegance, but deep down you know it's also survival. Someone nearby laughs softly, their fan pressed close to their mouth, and you realize the truth. In this world, fans are the language of subtext. Every gesture says what words cannot, every fold and flutter carries meaning. So you hold yours a little tighter, raise it again to hide the faintest smile. In this court, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is not speak at all. The night of music and fans fades into the background, and before long you find yourself at one of the court's great banquets, a spectacle of excess where endurance often matters more than indulgence. The hall is lit by rows of candles, flames dancing against polished screens, the air already heavy with incense before the trays even arrive. You brace yourself. Banquets at the Heian Court are marathons, not sprints. Mainstream fact, these feasts could last for hours, sometimes stretching deep into the night. Food came in waves, not all at once. Rice, fish, soups, and small delicacies, each meant to be eaten with grace, not speed. The meal wasn't about filling the stomach, but about filling the air with poetry, elegance, and presence. The most important thing wasn't the food, it was how you looked while eating it. You shift slightly, sleeves sprawling across your lap like unruly pets. A lacquer tray is set in front of you, bowls gleaming with broth, vegetables simmering in delicate sauces. You pick up chopsticks with careful precision. The challenge isn't in using them, it's in not dragging your sleeves straight through the soup. A tiny misstep, and you're the court's clumsy spectacle for the week. Here's the quirky tidbit: nobles sometimes used little sleeve guards to protect fabric from food accidents, but wearing them too openly could seem unfashionable, like admitting you weren't elegant enough to eat cleanly. Imagine bringing a giant lobster bib to a black tie dinner. Useful, yes. Socially safe, not so much. Historians still argue whether these protections were widely accepted or whether they remained hidden, whispered about in diaries, but never flaunted in public. The banquet hums with low conversation. Men sit just beyond screens, women arrayed in shimmering rows. The air is full of murmured poems, verses improvised to suit the food, the season, the flicker of light across sleeves. Someone recites a comparison between moonlight on sake cups and the sadness of autumn. Someone else responds with a clever pun about pine needles and persistence. You pretend to sip politely while mentally preparing your own reply, because silence here is as dangerous as speaking poorly. Time crawls. The food keeps arriving. The soup cools before you finish it. Your legs ache from sitting Caesar-style, folded beneath robes that crush circulation. You try to stretch, discreetly shifting, just enough to let blood flow again, but not so much that anyone notices. To fidget is to fail. Historians still argue whether these gatherings were genuinely enjoyed or whether they were endured. Diaries reveal both one woman gushing about the poetry and the elegance of the crowd, another muttering that the banquet dragged on so long she thought her spirit had left her body. You relate to the latter. The musicians return, plucking strings, blowing flutes that cut thin and high across the hall. The music is haunting, ethereal, the kind that seeps into your bones whether you want it to or not. You tap your fan softly against your sleeve, more out of habit than enjoyment, and watch the dancers take their slow, precise steps. Each robe ripples, each movement carefully rehearsed. Beauty has never looked so heavy. Here's another offbeat detail. Banquets sometimes included poetry contests, with participants submitting verses anonymously to be judged by the audience. Imagine sitting through a 5-course meal where instead of karaoke, everyone writes haiku about the steamed fish. Win, and you're remembered for your wit. Lose, and your words may be whispered about for weeks, long after the taste of sake has faded. The meal drags into its third hour. Candles' gutter smoke curls upward, and you can feel sweat prick beneath your powder. Still you hold steady posture, unbroken face serene. Inside you're screaming for a nap. Outside your elegance incarnate. At last the final course arrives, sweets delicately shaped, often flavored with honey or chestnut. They're beautiful, but by now even lifting your chopsticks feels like a test of willpower. You take a slow bite anyway, the sweetness clinging to your tongue. Around you, the murmurs soften, people drifting toward polite satisfaction. The banquet has done its job. You've endured, you've performed, and you've survived barely. By now you've realized the Heian court isn't just about clothes or perfumes or endless banquets. It's about rhythm, about matching yourself to the natural world with almost obsessive precision. Every month carries its own mood, every season its palette, and your robes are expected to echo it like living poetry. Mainstream fact. Heian nobles practiced Kasein no Irome, the art of seasonal layering. This wasn't random, it meant carefully choosing robe colors to reflect the time of year. In spring, pale pink over light green might suggest cherry blossoms against new leaves. In summer, white and blue hinted at streams and lotus blooms. Autumn demanded russet gold and orange, while winter evoked snow and pine in icy whites and dark greens. These combinations weren't optional, they were essential to proving your sensitivity, your refinement, your ability to mirror nature in silk. Tonight, as you prepare to move through another corridor, your attendants bring armfuls of robes dyed in fresh colors. Snow over plum, they murmur, or cherry blossom mist. Each name sounds like a poem, and each combination carries layers of meaning. Choose poorly, and you look uneducated. Choose perfectly, and your entrance becomes a living haiku. Here's the quirky tidbit: there were so many named combinations, hundreds in fact, that fashion almost became a secret code. Some records mention combinations like Yellow of the Underworld, which sounds more like a heavy metal band than a spring outfit. Historians still argue whether nobles genuinely kept track of all these palettes, or whether only the most fashion-obsessed diarists listed them obsessively. You suspect it's like modern wine tasting: half the crowd really knows, half the crowd is pretending. You run your hand along a robe dyed pale pink, the silk shimmering like dawn. Outside, cherry blossoms scatter in the wind, petals clinging to the palace roof. To wear this now feels almost dangerous, like blending into the scenery too perfectly. But isn't that the point? To dissolve into the season, to let your body become part of the landscape. Walking through the palace, you notice how other women have made their choices. One has layered blues and greens evoking a mountain stream. Another wears pale cream over grey like morning fog. Each entrance becomes a subtle competition. Who captures the mood of the season best, who earns whispers of admiration, who risks mockery. Historians still argue whether these color codes were rigidly enforced by official rules, or whether they evolved organically through competition and imitation. Some manuals list guidelines, but the more personal evidence, the diaries reveal constant anxiety, endless second-guessing. You can almost hear the muttered complaints. Does this shade of green look too much like last month's? Will people think I don't understand the season? And that's the exhausting beauty of it. You're not just dressing yourself, you're dressing the world, echoing its rhythms, weaving yourself into the poetry of nature. Every robe becomes a verse, every color a metaphor. Your sleeves brush against the corridor walls, the pale pink edges catching a breeze. A petal floats through the open screen, landing directly on the fabric. For a moment, it feels like confirmation. You chose correctly. You've become part of the season. But of course, the season changes quickly. Tomorrow the blossoms may fall. Tomorrow another palette will be demanded. There's no resting, no permanent victory in this game. Fashion here is fleeting, as ephemeral as the petals outside. You sigh softly, hiding it behind your fan, and glide forward. For tonight at least, you are the season incarnate. Tomorrow, you'll start again. The day after the blossom-colored robes, you find yourself summoned to leave the palace. That sounds simple enough. Just step outside, right? But no, in the Heian Court, leaving your residence means an entire production as elaborate as a stage play and almost as uncomfortable. Mainstream fact noblewomen rarely appeared in public on foot. Instead, they travelled in ox-drawn carriages called gisha. These carriages were large box-like structures with heavy curtains designed to protect the women from both the elements and the public gaze. Privacy was a virtue and exposure was scandalous. The result, you're about to be stuffed inside what feels like a mobile closet dressed in 20 pounds of layered silk. Your attendants tug the curtains aside and you step into the carriage. It sways slightly as your weight shifts the balance the ox outside, snorting as if bored already. Inside, the space is cramped, your robes pooling like restless animals around your ankles. The air grows stifling, almost immediately perfumed powder mixing with the musty scent of wood and fabric. Here's the quirky tidbit. Sometimes these carriages were so crowded with silk that attendants had to help tuck layers of robe inside before shutting the door, like trying to squeeze an overstuffed suitcase closed. Diaries complain of sleeves dragging in the mud or hems catching under wheels. And yes, historians still argue whether noblewomen found these journeys glamorous or simply miserable. On one hand, it was status, you were important enough to ride. On the other, you were basically a silk prisoner on wheels. The ox lurches forward, hooves clopping against the dirt road. The carriage creaks, the wooden frame groaning with each bump. You cling to the side for balance, though there's nowhere to fall but into your own sleeves. Outside you hear voices, footsteps, the occasional bark of a dog, but you see nothing. The curtains are drawn tight. It's like being carried through the world blindfolded, your only proof of existence, the sway of the cart and the smell of ox hair drifting faintly inside. You wonder, not for the first time, if this is comfort or confinement. There's a strange peace in being hidden, untouchable behind the screens. Yet there's also frustration. You want to glimpse the blossoms, the river, the streets of Kyoto buzzing with life. Instead, you're trapped in a box, overhearing the world, rather than living in it. Historians still argue whether these carriages reinforced women's seclusion or whether they offered a kind of freedom. After all, inside one, you could travel without being scrutinized, your reputation safe behind the curtains. But there's no denying the isolation. Every journey feels less like movement and more like being carried deeper into silence. The ox slows as the procession reaches a bridge. You feel the tilt of the boards beneath the wheels, the faint echo of hooves striking wood. For a moment you imagine yourself drifting in a boat rather than a cart carried along by unseen waters. But the fantasy shatters as the carriage jolts again, robes shifting heavily against your skin. You press a hand against the wall, listening. Somewhere outside, children laugh. Somewhere merchants call out their wares. The life of the city exists, vivid and noisy, just inches beyond the curtains, but you remain inside, cushioned in silk, unseen and unheard. When at last the carriage halts, you exhale in relief. The curtains part, attendants rushing forward to arrange your robes before you step out. You emerge slowly, carefully, like a bird coaxed from its cage, the outside air sharp and cool against your powdered face. Travel, Heian-style, glamorous in theory, claustrophobic in practice. You smooth your sleeves and smile faintly. Surviving the ride feels like an accomplishment in itself. You step down from the carriage, grateful to stretch your legs at last. But you're not headed for open gardens or bustling streets. Instead, attendants guide you toward yet another building where privacy reigns. Curtains, blinds, and screens divide every space. Here in the Heian Court, presence is almost always partial. You exist behind barriers, your words slipping past silk rather than your face appearing in the open. Mainstream fact communication between men and women often occurred through layers of screens. A nobleman might sit on the other side of a partition and exchange poetry with you without ever seeing your features directly. This wasn't considered strange. In fact, it was the expected way of interaction. Seeing too much of someone too soon could be scandalous, even vulgar. Words mattered more than faces. You settle behind a screen, your sleeves arranged neatly, a brush and paper placed before you. Already you can hear footsteps on the other side, the faint shuffle of robes. A voice greets you politely. soft but careful. You respond not with words, but with a poem written quickly folded and passed beneath the screen. The exchange has begun. Here's the quirky tidbit: some nobles took this practice so seriously that they judged potential partners solely on handwriting. An elegant brushstroke was considered a reflection of the soul. Imagine dating apps today rejecting you not for your photo, but for your sloppy penmanship. Historians still argue whether this emphasis on handwriting elevated women's influence, since many were accomplished calligraphers, or whether it simply imposed another impossible standard. Your brush moves across the paper ink, bleeding slightly as you compose something light about the season. Perhaps a metaphor about blossoms drifting or the way moonlight falls across a sleeve. You don't overthink it. Subtlety is better than brilliance. The reply slips back another verse, delicate, carefully phrased. You smile faintly. It feels like fencing, each poem a parry and riposte, measured and restrained. The room is hushed, save for the sound of brushes, scratching, paper folding, and fans fluttering. You could be inches away from someone's face, yet remain invisible, known only through the cadence of ink. The screen between you is not just fabric. It's a rule, a reminder that intimacy here must always pass through artifice. Historians still argue whether these poetic exchanges led to genuine connection, or whether they were largely performance-ritualized flirtation with little sincerity behind it. Diaries hint at both. Some romances bloomed entirely through words, while others reveal sharp disappointments once the screen finally lifted. You rest your brush and lean closer to the barrier. You can hear the faint rustle of movement on the other side, a breath caught before words are spoken. Yet the fabric remains in place, soft and opaque, both separating and protecting. You realize that in this world, distance itself becomes desire. The less you see, the more you imagine. The last poem comes back folded with care, its ink still faintly damp. You read it slowly, savoring the thought, then tuck it into your sleeve, as if tucking away a secret. The man beyond the screen raises his voice, polite in farewell. His footsteps retreat, leaving silence behind. And you remain in your half-hidden corner, the faint trace of ink lingering on your fingers, the memory of words echoing louder than any face. The screens close, the poems are tucked away, and life in the palace resumes. Yet here, in a world where most of you remains hidden, the smallest glimpse can carry the weight of a scandal. A flick of sleeve, the edge of a hem, even a sudden draft lifting a curtain, such tiny accidents can spark whispers that last for weeks. Mainstream fact: in the Heian court, modesty and concealment were considered marks of refinement. To be fully visible was to be vulgar. Women were expected to remain partly hidden, whether behind fans, curtains, or carriages. This made unintentional exposure an ankle as you shifted a strand of hair, slipping free, not just embarrassing, but socially dangerous. You sit carefully, sleeves folded like wings over your lap, when a breeze slips through the shutters. The fabric stirs. For a moment, your hem shifts just enough to reveal the embroidered edge of an underlayer. That's all it takes. Someone notices. A murmur travels down the row. You lower your eyes, pretending not to hear, but you know what's happening. Your sleeve has just become gossip. Here's the quirky tidbit: diaries describe men who claim to fall instantly in love after glimpsing nothing more than the back of a woman's robe or the curve of her hair across a pillow. Imagine Tinder, but instead of photos, all you get is a blurry shot of someone's elbow. Historians still argue whether these stories reflect real infatuation, or whether they're exaggerated, romanticized accounts written long after the fact. Still, they reveal just how electrifying a forbidden glimpse could be. The danger is that not all glimpses are flattering. A flash of unkempt hair, a clumsy step, even laughter considered too loud could ruin a reputation. You live in a world where subtlety is currency, where your allure rests on the mystery of what's unseen. To reveal too much is to squander it. You remember a tale whispered often, a woman dozing at a banquet, her robes slipping slightly as she leaned forward. A single ankle appeared pale against the floor. The room buzzed for weeks afterward, her name carried in conversations like a warning. To fall asleep in public was careless. To let the veil of mystery drop was unforgivable. Historians still argue whether this obsession with glimpses oppressed women into silence and immobility, or whether it gave them power because in a system where so little was revealed, women controlled what was shown. A glimpse offered deliberately could ignite desire more fiercely than full exposure. As you sit there, you feel the weight of this paradox. You are both shielded and scrutinized, invisible yet constantly watched. The world doesn't see you, but it sees the edges of you, and those edges are enough to define your worth. So you lower your fan, adjust your sleeve with deliberate grace, and give the room just a fraction of color, a sliver of silk. Was it accident? Was it intention? Let them wonder. After all, sometimes the most powerful scandal is the one you choreograph yourself. The whispers about sleeves and glimpses fade, but the fabric you wear still speaks louder than words. Here in the Heian court, robes are not only about beauty, they are declarations, stitched in silk messages woven for anyone sharp enough to read them. Mainstream fact clothing often reflected political affiliation and status. Colors, patterns, and even the number of layers could indicate not only your rank, but your ties to certain factions within the court. A robe was never just a robe. It was a banner, a coded speech without sound. When two women entered a hall, their palettes could silently announce their families' rivalries or alliances long before a single word was exchanged. You sit in the audience chamber, your robes carefully arranged in hues of pale green and gold. Across the room, another woman enters, her layers bold in crimson and deep purple. No one says anything, yet the air thickens. You both know what the colors imply: proximity to different power centers, rival influences at the emperor's ear. And everyone else knows it too. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some diaries mention women deliberately dressing in wrong colors to mock or slight their rivals. Imagine showing up to a royal gathering wearing the exact palette your enemy wore last week, as if saying, "I can do it better." Historians still argue whether these were personal acts of rebellion or orchestrated moves in larger political games, but either way, fashion became a weapon, sharper than any blade, allowed in court. Your sleeves brush the tatami as you lean forward, fan poised. Across the chamber, your rival does the same, her eyes hidden behind lacquered folds. It feels less like a social gathering and more like a silent duel, every layer of fabric a move on a chessboard. What makes it exhausting is that these games aren't just for show. The emperor himself pays attention, his preferences rippling outward. If he favors a certain shade or combination, the entire court shifts to follow, everyone scrambling to echo his taste. A single compliment can make a color combination the rage for a season. A single frown can doom it to obscurity. Historians still argue whether this was fashion dictating politics or politics dictating fashion, perhaps both. After all, robes were woven not just with silk, but with ambition, carrying hopes of recognition, promotion, favor. When you slipped into them each morning, you weren't just dressing, you were entering the battlefield. You think back to your own robes now, their pale green, chosen to suggest renewal, harmony, subtle confidence. But you also remember the careful discussions last night, your attendants whispering about rival households, about what colors to avoid, lest you appear aligned with the wrong clan. Dressing feels less like self-expression and more like espionage with threads as your coded messages. As the audience disperses, you rise carefully, layers dragging with dignified weight. You meet your rival's gaze just briefly across the hall. Nothing is said. Nothing needs to be said. Tomorrow, another robe will be chosen, another message sent. In this court, fashion isn't just clothing, it's conversation, rivalry, politics stitched in silence. And every sleeve, every hem, every color is another word in the endless debate of power. The court glitters with color, perfume, and endless silk, but beyond the palace walls another voice hums steadily, that of Buddhism, reminding everyone of impermanence, restraint, and the futility of worldly excess. It seeps even into these gilded halls, tugging at sleeves woven with ambition. Mainstream fact: during the Heian period, Buddhist teachings grew influential among the nobility. Many aristocrats funded temples, copied sutras, or retreated into religious practice later in life. Yet even while they lived among piles of silk and lacquer, they heard constant reminders that attachment to beauty was illusion, that every robe and every perfume was only temporary. You hear the low drone of a sutra from a nearby temple, carried faintly on the breeze. It weaves itself into your thoughts as you adjust your layers, wondering not for the first time if all this fabric is worth the wait. Each robe is exquisite, yes, but each robe is also another tether, another reminder of how far you are from simplicity. Here's the quirky tidbit: some monks mocked the extravagance of the court in parables, comparing layers of robes to layers of delusion. One story likens a noblewoman's silks to cobwebs spun by spiders, beautiful in sunlight but fragile, meaningless. Historians still argue whether these critiques genuinely influenced noble behavior, or whether they were politely ignored while everyone kept piling on more fabric. You think of those who gave it all up. Women who shaved their heads, took vows, and traded brocade for plain robes. Some of their diaries remain tinged with relief. No more color codes, no more aching posture at banquets, no more fans fluttering in endless games, just chanting gardens and quiet. Was it liberation or another kind of confinement? Historians debate this too. Inside the palace, you see hints of restraint creeping in. A noble might choose slightly plainer robes, citing Buddhist modesty. Another might sponsor a temple, hoping their name will echo in chants long after silk has decayed. Yet the irony is clear. Lavish temples, gilded statues, and elaborate rituals often mirrored the very excess they were supposed to reject. Simplicity itself became a competition. As night deepens, you imagine what the Buddha would say about this hall of silks and powders. Would he laugh? Would he shake his head at sleeves trailing like waterfalls? Or would he simply smile, knowing that even these layers, for all their weight, will one day dissolve like smoke? You lower your fan, stare into the candle flame, and feel the question stir in your chest. Perhaps the robes are beautiful. Perhaps they are burdens. Perhaps they are both. And perhaps the monks, chanting outside the walls, knew the truth long before anyone inside admitted it, that beauty is fleeting and attachment, even to silk, binds you tighter than any ox-drawn carriage ever could. The chanting fades, leaving only the hush of silk against tatami and the faint crackle of lamps. The centuries shift quietly beneath your feet. Slowly, the endless parade of robes begins to thin. What once defined the pinnacle of elegance starts to weigh too heavily, too impractically for a society that keeps changing. Mainstream fact by the late Heian, and into later eras the extravagant, multi-layered style began to wane. Political turbulence, economic strain, and shifting aesthetics gradually pushed nobles toward simpler, lighter clothing. The towering elegance of the Junihito 12-layer robes became rare, preserved mostly for special ceremonies rather than daily wear. You glance down at your sleeves, remembering the hours spent arranging them, the effort to choose perfect seasonal colors, the aches in your back from sitting so still. It feels eternal in the moment, but you know better. Fashion is as fleeting as cherry blossoms, as fragile as the ink on a poem folded behind a screen. Here's the quirky tidbit: long after the Heian era, when the robes were no longer daily wear, they survived in rituals at the imperial court. Even today, empresses wear them at enthronement ceremonies, a ghost of Heian elegance still shimmering in the modern age. Historians still argue whether this continuity preserves genuine tradition or whether it's a stylized reenactment nostalgia stitched into silk for the sake of ceremony. The court you've lived in feels like a dream already fading. The fans flutter, the ox-drawn carriages creak, the banquets drag on, but in the end, they all dissolve. What remains is the memory, the way people spoke of sleeves, the way poems captured colors, the way beauty was chased even when it slipped through every grasping hand. And you sitting here centuries later in imagination feel it too. The weight of robes that once whispered status, the perfume of powder that once signaled allure, the careful posture that once meant survival. All of it gone, all of it leaving behind only stories, soft, sleepy echoes of a world that once glittered in silk. You lean back, eyes, heavy thoughts drifting. The palace dims, the silk quiets, and even the gossip fades into silence. What remains is stillness. What remains is the truth, whispered by monks and poets alike. Beauty is fleeting, but memory lingers. And now as we close this long winding walk through the Heian Court, let yourself drift deeper into quiet. The silk sleeves settle into stillness, the fans fold shut, and the candlelight grows softer, dimmer, almost disappearing. You've walked through corridors heavy with perfume, you've sat through banquets that seem to stretch on forever, you've hidden behind screens where poetry took the place of faces, and all of it, every robe and every gesture, has slowly faded into history. Let that thought carry you downward like the petals of cherry blossoms falling into a stream. Each robe, no matter how dazzling, slipped away with time. Each whispered scandal dissolved into silence. What seemed unbearable in the moment, sleeves too heavy, banquets too long, carriages too cramped, eventually became only memory, softened at the edges, gentle now, almost sweet. Breathe in slowly, as if inhaling the faint scent of incense still lingering in the halls. Exhale gently, letting it all go, the layers, the posture, the endless attention to detail. Imagine yourself stepping out of those robes at last, lighter, freer, wrapped only in the quiet comfort of rest. The palace fades into shadow, the monk's chanting softens into nothing, the ox stops its plodding steps. All is still, all is calm, and you resting here are safe, untouched by the weight of silk or the pressure of eyes. Only quiet remains, carrying you gently towards sleep. So let the story dissolve, let the colors dim, let the fabric slip away. The world outside can wait, for now there is only peace, only stillness, only rest.